You arrive before the sun has fully decided to exist. The land is still soaked in night, heavy with mist that clings low to the fields, as if unsure whether to lift itself or stay pressed against the earth. The ground beneath your bare feet is cold enough to feel personal. It seeps upward, settling into bone before thought has time to protest. There is no moment of preparation here. No gentle waking. The day begins already demanding, already counting what it will take from you. Somewhere in the haze, a bell murmurs, not ringing so much as reminding. Time has authority, and it does not wait for agreement. You stand still for a moment, breathing air that tastes of damp soil, rot, and old grass. Your breath fogs briefly, then disappears, like proof that you were here and then weren't. Fatigue is already present, sitting in your shoulders and lower back, familiar and unremarkable. You did not earn it today. It was inherited, passed down quietly, like the land, like the habits, like the certainty that rest must be justified before it is allowed. The sky lightens by degrees too subtle to celebrate. Gray shifts into thinner gray. Shapes sharpen reluctantly. You move because standing still costs more than moving. Muscles complain, then fall silent. Complaints waste energy. You have learned this without remembering when the lesson was taught. Others emerge from low houses crouched against the land, doors opening with careful restraint to keep warmth from escaping too quickly. Faces look older than they should. Eyes blink against the cold, already calculating the hours ahead. No one greets anyone else. Words are saved for when they matter, and this does not matter. Survival is not social. It is procedural. You bend to your first task while the mist still holds. Hands sink into soil dark and compacted, smelling of rain remembered too well. The earth does not yield easily. It never has. It resists, not out of malice but consistency. You work anyway, repeating movements taught by watching, by copying, by necessity. Hunger hums quietly in your stomach, not sharp yet, just aware. It will speak louder later. As the light grows, so does sound. Tools scrape. Animals shift and snort, their breath steaming. Somewhere nearby, a child coughs too deeply, too early in the day. No one stops to listen. Listening would require choices no one can afford to make. The bell rings again, farther now, swallowed by distance and work. Time moves forward whether you notice or not. By mid-morning, your body is warm in places it should not be and cold in places that never seem to change. Sweat dampens your shirt, clinging unpleasantly as air moves across it. Your back aches with a dull persistence that suggests it plans to stay. You straighten briefly, then bend again. Straightening is a luxury. Bent work gets done faster. Food arrives late and small. Bread, dark and dense, broken by hand and shared without ceremony. You eat slowly, counting bites without admitting you are counting. Each swallow pushes hunger back, just far enough to make thinking possible again. You drink water cautiously. Everyone does. Water carries too many stories. The day stretches long and indifferent. Clouds gather without consulting you, threatening rain that could help or ruin everything with equal enthusiasm. You glance upward, then back down. Watching the sky does not change its mind. You work until the muscles in your hands begin to feel separate from you, until movement happens from memory alone. By afternoon, the mist is gone, replaced by a pale sun that warms without kindness. Heat presses down just enough to make breathing feel heavier. Flies gather. Dirt cakes into sweat along your arms and neck. You wipe your face with the back of your hand, smearing more than removing. Cleanliness is temporary here. Filth is efficient. You hear talk drift past, complaints about taxes, about a lord who is not visited but still expects payment, about grain stores that look thinner than they should. The humor is dry, sharpened by repetition. Someone mutters that God sees all of this. Someone else mutters that God should consider helping. The comments float away unanswered. As evening approaches, Exhaustion settles deeper, heavier, as if gravity itself has increased. You carry tools back toward the village, steps slower now, more deliberate. Houses wait, low and dark, already preparing to contain bodies again. Smoke curls from chimneys, promising warmth that will cost clarity. You enter a space thick with shared breath, the air heavy with smoke that stings eyes and settles into lungs. Fire crackles low, fed sparingly. Wood is counted. Everything is counted. You sit on a bench worn smooth by generations of the same movement. The wood is warm, borrowed heat passed along without consent. Someone hands you a bowl. Soup is thin, more water than substance, but hot enough to matter. You drink carefully, letting the warmth spread through you, brief and fragile. Bread follows. Crumbs are rescued. Waste is remembered. Night gathers outside without drama. Inside, bodies press closer, sharing warmth because distance is inefficient. Privacy does not exist. Every cough is heard. Every movement noticed. Sleep comes lightly, broken by sounds that might mean nothing or everything. You wake often, listening, then drift again because there is no benefit to staying awake too long. Days repeat like this. Morning without promise. Work without end. Hunger negotiated daily with soil and sky. Seasons shift quietly, bringing new discomforts that feel suspiciously like the old ones. Summer dries the fields too much. Autumn rains too often. Winter arrives without apology, cold settling into cracks you pretended were small. Bread grows thinner. Soup stretches further. Fires shrink. Wood disappears faster than expected. You learn to sit closer, to move less, to breathe shallower. Silence thickens. Snow muffles sound, turning every step into effort. Nights lengthen until time itself feels scarce. Illness moves more easily now, loving the cold, lingering in coughs that deepen and fevers that shine too brightly in firelight. No one names it. Naming invites panic. Panic wastes energy. Faith fills the hollow places hunger leaves behind. You step into the church because it is warmer than outside and quieter than your thoughts. Candles flicker against painted suffering that looks familiar. Prayers rise softly, negotiated upward toward a sky that does not clarify its intentions. Hunger is framed as trial. Endurance as virtue. The explanation fits neatly around the absence. You accept it because acceptance costs less than argument. Power exists elsewhere. You feel it mostly through absence. Lords eat differently. You know this without seeing it. When you do see it, white bread, meat steaming, cups refilled without calculation. The distance feels physical, measured in mouthfuls. You do not feel anger so much as clarity. This is how the world arranges itself. Comfort protected long enough forgets the cost of maintaining it. Justice arrives publicly and without mercy. Theft born of hunger is still theft. Punishment educates the many by hurting the one. You stand among others, silent, breathing shallowly, learning where survival crosses lines drawn by people who eat better. When it ends, work resumes. The fields do not wait. War arrives eventually, as it always does, opening its mouth and expecting to be fed. Armies eat first. Grain disappears into wagons. Livestock walks away without looking back. Civilians wait. Hunger sharpens into despair. Violence does not roar. It works. When the armies move on, emptiness remains. Fields trampled. Stores emptied. Silence heavier than before. Through all of it, your body adapts. Hunger reshapes you quietly. Expectations shrink. Desire fades. Endurance becomes identity. You stop asking when things will improve and start asking how to get through today. That question feels answerable. Survival becomes a skill practiced daily. How to stand without wasting strength. How to sleep lightly enough to wake when needed. How to eat slowly so the moment lasts longer than the food. Years pass. Famines come and go. Stories remain, whispered to warn and remember. Hunger outlives memory, teaching restraint long after its sharpest edges have dulled. Even when bowls are fuller, hands hesitate. Crumbs are noticed. Fullness feels suspicious. Scarcity becomes inheritance, stitched into habit. And then, as the day ends the way it began, without promise, you lower yourself onto straw and shadow once more. Embers dim. Smoke settles. Hunger is still present, but softened by exhaustion. Outside, the sky is empty and vast, offering no signs worth naming. Stars watch without interest. They always have. You close your eyes not to escape, but to pause. Life here does not scream at suffering. It breathes through it. Endurance is not heroic. It is habitual. It is the quiet agreement to wake again if waking is required. Sleep arrives gently, earned rather than given, carrying no dreams worth keeping. And as you drift, you understand the tired truth this world teaches best. Comfort was never promised. Survival was simply practiced, dawn after dawn, beneath a sky that never asked whether you were ready. Your body learns the land before your mind ever does. It settles into you quietly, shaping you from the inside out. Your back curves early, not from age but from repetition, from bending to soil that never meets you halfway. Hands harden quickly, skin thickening, cracking, staining dark with earth that does not fully wash away no matter how often you scrub. Mud finds its way into every crease and stays there, as if claiming you in return. Movement becomes familiar enough to disappear. Lift, bend, pull, the rhythm repeats, until thinking feels unnecessary. Your muscles learn the sequence better than memory ever could. You no longer decide to work. Your body simply continues, responding to need the way lungs respond to air. Pain arrives, then settles into background, a constant hum that stops asking for attention. Once it understands, it will not receive it. There is little separation between who you are and what you do. You are not someone who works the land. You are someone shaped by it. Strength is not loud here. It is measured quietly, by how long you continue without complaint, by how little you pause, by how efficiently you move even when exhaustion presses down hard enough to blur the edges of thought. Ambition fades early. Not because you lacked it, but because it required space this life never offered. Endurance replaces it, practical and unromantic. You learn to conserve yourself, to waste nothing, not food, not motion, not breath. Even gestures grow smaller, more precise, trimmed of anything unnecessary. When you finally stop for a moment, straightening slowly, spine protesting the unfamiliar posture, you feel how deeply the work has settled into you. The land does not release its hold when the day ends. It lives in your joints, your posture, your quiet understanding that tomorrow will ask for the same movements again, and that your body already knows how to answer. Your body learns the land before your mind ever does. It settles into you quietly, shaping you from the inside out. Your back curves early, not from age but from repetition, from bending to soil that never meets you halfway. Hands harden quickly, skin thickening, cracking, staining dark with earth that does not fully wash away no matter how often you scrub. Mud finds its way into every crease and stays there, as if claiming you in return. Movement becomes familiar enough to disappear. Lift, bend, pull, the rhythm repeats, until thinking feels unnecessary. Your muscles learn the sequence better than memory ever could. You no longer decide to work. Your body simply continues, responding to need the way lungs respond to air. Pain arrives, then settles into background, a constant hum that stops asking for attention. Once it understands, it will not receive it. There is little separation between who you are and what you do. You are not someone who works the land. You are someone shaped by it. Strength is not loud here. It is measured quietly, by how long you continue without complaint, by how little you pause, by how efficiently you move even when exhaustion presses down hard enough to blur the edges of thought. Ambition fades early. Not because you lacked it, but because it required space this life never offered. Endurance replaces it, practical and unromantic. You learn to conserve yourself, to waste nothing, not food, not motion, not breath. Even gestures grow smaller, more precise, trimmed of anything unnecessary. When you finally stop for a moment, straightening slowly, spine protesting the unfamiliar posture, you feel how deeply the work has settled into you. The land does not release its hold when the day ends. It lives in your joints, your posture, your quiet understanding that tomorrow will ask for the same movements again, and that your body already knows how to answer. Chapter 3. Homes where smoke never leaves shelter offers protection, but never comfort. Huts crouch low against wind and rain, their interiors dim and shared. Smoke drifts endlessly, softening voices and lungs alike. Warmth exists only when bodies cluster close. This chapter rests inside these homes, where privacy dissolves and hunger waits patiently. The listener feels how even rest is shaped by necessity, how sleep comes shallow and easily broken. Shelter keeps you alive, but it does not pretend to care how you feel about it. The hut crouches low against wind and rain, pressed into the earth as if trying to disappear. Its doorway forces you to bow whether you believe in humility or not. Inside, light thins immediately, swallowed by walls stained dark from years of smoke that never truly leaves. It drifts in slow, familiar patterns, softening voices, dulling edges, settling into lungs that have learned to accept it as part of breathing. The air is always busy here. It carries dampness, old straw, cooked grain stretched too far, and the persistent scent of human presence layered over itself. Warmth exists, but only when bodies gather close, sharing heat without asking permission. Distance is inefficient. Privacy dissolves quickly, leaving only routine. Every movement is noticed. Every sound matters. A cough travels. A sigh is felt. You sit where sitting is allowed, on packed earth or a bench worn smooth by generations making the same compromise. The fire burns low, fed carefully, because wood is counted long before it is burned. Smoke stings your eyes just enough to remind you where you are. No one wipes tears away. They are not always tears. Hunger waits patiently in the corners of the room. It does not rush. It knows it will be addressed eventually, imperfectly. A pot simmers with more water than substance. You eat slowly, letting heat do most of the work. Bread follows, dark and dense, broken by hand, crumbs rescued without comment. Waste feels personal. When night deepens, sleep arrives shallow and cautious. Bodies lie close, listening to each other breathe. Wood creaks. Wind presses against the walls. You wake often, not afraid, just alert. Even rest here is shaped by necessity, earned lightly, broken easily, held just long enough to stand up again when the day demands it. Food arrives without ceremony, because ceremony would suggest abundance. It is set down quietly, as if embarrassed by how little it is. Bread comes first, dark, dense, coarse enough to resist the knife. You break it by hand, feeling the grain tear unevenly, crumbs falling and being caught instinctively before they reach the floor. Waste feels almost insulting. This bread is not meant to be enjoyed. It is meant to last. Soup follows, thin enough to show its own limits. Steam rises anyway, carrying the smell of whatever could be spared, roots, a hint of grain, perhaps something green remembered rather than present. You hold the bowl close, letting the warmth seep into your fingers before it reaches your mouth. Heat matters here. It convinces the body it has been fed more than it actually has. You eat slowly, not out of mindfulness, but strategy. Each swallow is measured. You let the taste linger even when there is little to taste. Hunger does not leave. It steps back, folding itself neatly into the background, waiting its turn to speak again. You know better than to expect silence from it. Around you, others do the same. No one rushes. Talking pauses while eating happens. Food demands attention. It becomes memory even as you consume it, a reminder of work done, of fields argued with, of weather survived. This bowl holds more than sustenance. It holds proof that today did not win entirely. When it is finished, you scrape carefully, wiping the inside clean with bread already destined to disappear. The bowl is lighter. You are not. Hunger settles again, patient and familiar. But for a moment, brief, fragile, you remember what it feels like to be held together. And that is enough to carry you forward. Children do not linger here. They pass through childhood the way weather passes through a field, quickly, leaving marks behind. Small hands learn labor early, fingers wrapping around tools almost as big as their forearms, guided less by instruction than by watching. No one explains much. Explanation costs time. Demonstration is faster. A child stands close, imitates the movement, adjusts when corrected by silence rather than praise. Play exists, but only in pauses. It happens in the thin spaces between tasks, brief and improvised. A stone becomes a game. A stick becomes a boundary, then a sword, then firewood when someone calls their name. Laughter flares suddenly and disappears just as fast, swallowed by responsibility that arrives without apology. There are no afternoons reserved for growing slowly. Growth is expected to hurry. Bodies adapt quickly to strain. Limbs lengthen without strength catching up. Faces sharpen early. Illness interrupts often, lingering longer than it should. Some children recover. Some fade quietly out of routine. Names stop being spoken once the work requires attention again. Grief exists, but it learns efficiency. Tears are allowed briefly, then folded away like everything else. You watch them move with a seriousness that feels borrowed. They carry water, mind animals, fetch wood, all with the careful focus of people who already understand consequence. Hunger teaches them restraint before indulgence ever has a chance. They eat slowly, instinctively, as if saving a moment that will not return. There is sorrow in this shortening of innocence, but it is quiet, never announced. Resilience replaces what was taken, settling into posture and habit. These children do not imagine different lives. They grow into the one waiting for them, learning early how to endure, and doing so with a steadiness that feels both impressive and unbearably unfair. Faith settles into your life quietly, the way smoke does, finding corners you stopped noticing long ago. It does not arrive with revelation. It arrives with routine. Bells mark time when nothing else does. Candles burn when daylight fails. Words are repeated often enough that they begin to feel solid, dependable, like walls that might hold if leaned on carefully. You step into the church because everyone does. The stone is cool, even in summer, holding the cold patiently through the seasons. Light flickers against painted faces frozen in familiar suffering. Saints bleed, kneel, endure. Their stories feel reassuringly repetitive. Hardship is not random here. It is framed. It has purpose, even if that purpose is never fully explained. Prayers are spoken softly, negotiated upward toward a sky that rarely responds clearly. You ask for strength more often than relief. Strength feels realistic. Relief feels suspicious. Hunger becomes trial. Pain becomes instruction. Endurance becomes virtue. The explanation fits neatly around the life you already have, which is part of its success. Faith offers comfort, but also boundaries. It tells you where to stand, when to bow, what questions are allowed to remain unanswered. You learn which doubts to swallow and which words to leave unspoken. Silence becomes part of belief, heavy and familiar. It keeps things orderly. It keeps you moving. You kneel, joints protesting against stone. and feel the strange relief of not having to solve anything here. Responsibility is passed upward, even if nothing comes back down. Candles hiss softly. Breath fogs faintly in the cold air. For a moment, the world feels contained. Explain just enough to continue. When you leave, hardship is waiting exactly where you left it. But it feels framed now, named, folded into something larger than itself. And that, in a life like this, is often enough. Power does not visit often, but it is always present. You feel it in absence more than appearance. The Lord's face is a rumor. His name travels farther than he ever does. What arrives instead are demands, rent counted carefully, labor owed without negotiation, rules enforced by people who did not write them and do not benefit from explaining them. Authority settles into your life like weather, unavoidable, uninterested in fairness. You experience it from below, where perspective is narrow and consequences are immediate. A missed payment does not become a conversation. It becomes a problem that grows legs and walks toward you. Notices are delivered without urgency, because urgency belongs to those who can afford it. Justice moves slowly here, heavy and methodical, grinding rather than striking. When it arrives, it stays long enough to be remembered. You learn obedience the way you learned work, through repetition. Bowing becomes posture. Compliance becomes instinct. Resistance exists, but it is expensive. It costs time, energy, safety. Most cannot afford it, and those who try often become examples rather than exceptions. The lesson spreads quietly. Survival favors those who understand when to lower their eyes. You hear stories, of course, of lords who are kind, of laws that protect. They circulate the way myths do, offering shape without substance. In practice, power is distant and intimate at the same time, touching your life without ever touching you. It claims a portion of what you grow, what you earn, what you are allowed to hope for. You adjust. Everyone does. You plan around obligations you did not choose. You measure effort against consequence. You keep your head down not out of fear exactly, but efficiency. In a world like this, obedience is not devotion, it is habit. Illness does not knock. It slips in the way cold does, unnoticed until it has already settled somewhere important. A cough lingers too long. A fever warms skin that was already tired. Breath carries it. Water carries it. Touch passes it along without intention. Knowledge here is thin, worn down to guesses and habits repeated because they are all that remain. Fear, by contrast, is familiar. It has lived alongside you long enough to stop announcing itself. Bodies weaken quickly. Strength leaves faster than it arrived, draining away in quiet stages. Someone who worked beside you yesterday sits very still today, conserving what little they have left. Recovery, when it happens, feels accidental rather than earned. No one speaks of certainty. You learn not to ask who will improve and who will not. The answer would change nothing. Illness blends into daily life without spectacle. Work continues until it cannot. Then others adjust, filling gaps with heavier breaths and lowered expectations. Prayers replace cures. Hands rest on foreheads. Candles burn longer than planned. Words are spoken softly, not because they are sacred, but because volume feels inappropriate in the presence of something so patient. Death becomes a neighbor rather than a stranger. It sits nearby, not always invited, not always acknowledged. When it takes someone, there is a pause, brief, practical, and then movement resumes. Fields do not wait. Hunger does not pause. The world absorbs the loss and redistributes the weight. You live with this awareness folded into you, careful but not frantic. In a life like this, illness is not interruption, it is atmosphere, illness does not knock. It slips in the way cold does, unnoticed until it has already settled somewhere important. A cough lingers too long. A fever warms skin that was already tired. Breath carries it. Water carries it. Touch passes it along without intention. Knowledge here is thin, worn down to guesses and habits repeated because they are all that remain. Fear, by contrast, is familiar. It has lived alongside you long enough to stop announcing itself. Bodies weaken quickly. Strength leaves faster than it arrived, draining away in quiet stages. Someone who worked beside you yesterday sits very still today, conserving what little they have left. Recovery, when it happens, feels accidental rather than earned. No one speaks of certainty. You learn not to ask who will improve and who will not. The answer would change nothing. Illness blends into daily life without spectacle. Work continues until it cannot. Then others adjust, filling gaps with heavier breaths and lowered expectations. Prayers replace cures. Hands rest on foreheads. Candles burn longer than planned. Words are spoken softly, not because they are sacred, but because volume feels inappropriate in the presence of something so patient. Death becomes a neighbor rather than a stranger. It sits nearby, not always invited, not always acknowledged. When it takes someone, there is a pause, brief, practical, and then movement resumes. Fields do not wait. Hunger does not pause. The world absorbs the loss and redistributes the weight. You live with this awareness folded into you, careful but not frantic. In a life like this, illness is not interruption. It is atmosphere. Chapter 9. Aging before its time. Years press heavily on peasant lives. Youth fades early. Strength diminishes without pause. Old age, when reached, arrives quietly and without ceremony. This chapter rests in the weariness of time, where survival itself feels like accomplishment. The listener senses how life is measured not in years, but in seasons endured. Years do not pass gently here. They press. They settle into joints and posture, into the way you rise more slowly than you once did and pretend it is nothing. Youth fades early, worn down by repetition rather than choice. Strength does not disappear all at once. It thins, it shortens. It becomes something you manage carefully, the way you manage food or fire. Your body remembers every season it has carried. Knees ache before rain. Hands stiffen in the cold, fingers reluctant to close around tools they have held for decades. You learn to work differently, slower, closer to the ground, relying on habit rather than force. Pride adjusts. It has to. The land does not care how old you feel. Old age, when it comes, does not announce itself. There is no marker, no celebration of having lasted this long. You simply notice one day that others lift what you once did, that children you remember carrying now move past you with familiar efficiency. You step aside without comment. Making room is another skill learned quietly. Rest becomes longer, more necessary, never quite enough. Sleep arrives earlier, lighter, broken by aches that do not fully release even in darkness. You listen more now. Watching costs less than doing. Memory fills spaces where ambition once lived. You recall winters that took more than they gave, summers that promised relief and delivered exhaustion instead. Counting years feels pointless. Seasons endured make more sense. Survival itself begins to feel like accomplishment, though no one says it aloud. You have outlasted many things: storms, hunger, illness, people whose names have faded from use. There is no reward for this, only continuation. You sit with that weariness gently. Time has shaped you the way water shapes stone, slowly, without concern for symmetry. And still, you remain. Not triumphant. Not finished. Just present, carrying the quiet weight of having endured as long as the land required. Death does not arrive dramatically. It comes the way sleep does on an overworked night, quietly, without negotiation, often in the same room where you learned how to live. The walls are familiar. The air smells the same as it always has. Smoke, damp earth, human breath layered over years. You lie where you have always rested, body finally still enough to stop arguing. There is no gathering crowd, no announcement, just the soft realization, shared by a few, that the work has ended. Those around you move carefully, efficiently. There is grief, but it is contained. Grief must learn the same discipline as hunger. The body is washed simply, wrapped, carried a short distance into ground that already knows you well. The grave is shallow, practical, dug without ceremony. Wood, if there is any, is reused. Stone is not wasted on names that will not be spoken long enough to justify it. You are buried among others who live the same way, quietly, repeatedly, without record. The soil settles back into place as if relieved to take you back. No monument marks where you lie. No dates insist on being remembered. Memory fades quickly here, not out of cruelty, but necessity. The living must keep moving. What remains is not a name, but evidence. Fields worked smooth by hands that learned every stone. Paths worn deep by feet that passed the same way every day without asking why. Habits carried forward without explanation. How to bend, how to ration, how to endure without complaint. These things survive longer than words ever could. Night returns as it always has. Embers dim. Smoke thins. The land breathes on, indifferent and sustained. You rest within it now, not erased, just absorbed. Medieval peasants did not seek to be remembered. They sought only to last long enough to matter to the next day. And in doing so, they shaped the world quietly, then disappeared back into the soil they understood better than any history ever would.